Well, basically what happened was the producers told the director, whose name was Usan Palsy, that I was so dark that it looked like I would scare everyone. So they wouldn't hire me. Wesley Snipes' white agent from CAA that sent Wesley in for a role, and this is documented, and they called him and said, don't send anybody darker than Denzel.
Do you remember that face, the villain who sent chills down your spine in Menace to Society? The loyal friend who stood firm in Ray? The outrageous Pinky in Next Friday who had audiences rolling with laughter? Clifton Powell, a name not everyone remembers, but a face etched deep in the memory of American audiences. He has appeared in more than 200 films, from major features and television shows to small independent projects. He was often jokingly called the man of every supporting role, never lacking work yet never reaching the towering heights of a Denzel Washington or Samuel L. Jackson. But behind that familiar face lies a dark secret, a secret that cuts deep into the injustice and pain of a black actor's journey in Hollywood. Did Hollywood ever give him a fair chance? Or did it take everything away from him? Washington, D.C., 1956. In the middle of an America torn apart by racial division, a black boy was born in the Mayfair Mansion's housing projects. His name was Clifton Powell. Mayfair was not a place for dreams. It was the project's walls, peeling hallways, damp and crumbling. A place where every night the sound of police sirens and screams in the dark became an unwilling soundtrack. Children grew up with violence and poverty, and the future usually split in only two directions: prison or the cemetery. Clifton saw it all. The boys who played football with him on the brick courtyard today could be lost to drugs tomorrow. Families in the neighborhood could fall apart over the smallest fight. From an early age, he had to learn how to live on guard, not to succeed, but just to survive. In their cramped apartment, Powell's only light was his mother. She worked any job she could find, from cleaning to selling goods, just to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. His father toiled in heavy labor, hauling loads, working with his hands. His school lacked resources, and teachers often looked down on black students. Once, when Clifton brought home good grades instead of encouragement, he heard a white teacher sneer, "No matter how smart you are, you're still just a Mayfair kid." But theater saved him. It opened the door to the Duke Ellington School of the Arts, one of the rare schools where black children could dare to dream bigger. Yet that path was also paved with blood and sweat. Clifton had to study and work at the same time, constantly proving that he deserved to be there. Once Powell shared, "I grew up in a world where every day I had to choose between being a victim or a survivor. I chose to survive." And he did survive. But not just to exist, he survived to prepare for a long journey, one where Hollywood would both give him the light and take everything away. The difficult road to Hollywood, a wound carried throughout his career. Clifton Powell began his film career in the early 1980s. But the path he walked was anything but easy. While many white actors of the time easily landed leading roles, Powell struggled with tiny parts, often nameless characters who appeared on screen for only a few minutes. In the 1980s, Powell appeared in projects like House Party 1990 and Deep Cover 1992. But in most of these roles, he was just a background cop, a criminal in a few scenes, or a faceless character. He once bitterly said, "Audiences saw me on screen, but they didn't know who I was. I was like a shadow there, then gone." That reflected a harsh truth in Hollywood. Black actors were often trapped in stereotypes. They were the thugs, the drug dealers, or the funny sidekick. For Powell, the only option to survive was to accept any role, no matter how small. The numbers tell the story. A supporting role in a TV show during the 1980s paid white actors around $500, $700 a day, while black actors were usually given the lowest rate. For Powell, it was just enough to scrape by. But he endured, knowing that if he quit, the dream would be gone forever. And there was a wound Clifton Powell carried throughout his career. It didn't come from critics' reviews of his acting, but from two cold words in Hollywood: too dark. He once recalled that in a major film, everything seemed within reach until the television executives coldly told the producers, "We think he's so dark he's gonna scare everybody." With one sentence, a door slammed shut before his eyes. The pain didn't stop with films. Powell vividly remembered being cut from a McDonald's commercial, a chance that could have brought both money and recognition. The only reason they said I was too dark. It wasn't just a lost contract. It was a cruel reminder that his skin color was treated like a crime, and tragically, this was not an isolated case. Powell once mentioned an unwritten rule in the casting world: don't send anyone darker than Denzel. An invisible rule, yet powerful enough to eliminate countless talents right from the start, simply because they were born with skin darker than what Hollywood preferred. Powell sighed bitterly. I wasn't blocked because of my talent. I was blocked because of something I could never change: the color of my skin. This story was not just one actor's tragedy, but a painful testimony to the injustice that has existed for far too long in the film capital. For Clifton Powell, the dream too often turned into a nightmare, simply because his skin was considered too dark in the eyes of those who held the power. In 1993, Powell finally landed a memorable role, Cha-Cha, in Menace II Society. This classic film portrayed the violent lives of black youth in Los Angeles, and Powell's character, a ruthless gangster, sent chills through audiences. Though it was only a supporting role, his powerful performance made the name Clifton Powell start to stand out. Powell never stopped at just one type of character. He took on major films like Dead Presidents 1995, Why Do Fools Fall in Love 1998, and Rush Hour 1998. What stood out was his range, the ability to move from terrifying villains to hilarious comedic roles. Audiences will never forget Pinky in Next Friday 2000 and Friday. After Next 2002, the eccentric, over-the-top barbershop owner who could spark laughter with just a wide-eyed stare or exaggerated gesture. Perhaps the most important role of Powell's career was Jeff Brown in Ray, the biopic of music legend Ray Charles. As Ray's friend and manager, Powell delivered a performance full of loyalty, warmth, and deeply human conflicts. The film went on to win 2 Oscars, with Jamie Foxx taking home Best Actor, and Clifton Powell was singled out as a standout among the supporting cast. Ray marked one of the rare moments when Hollywood truly recognized Powell's talent. To this day, Powell has appeared in more than 200 films and television series. Even without leading roles, he always found a way to make his characters unforgettable. This dedication earned him the nickname, the man of every supporting role. And yet, despite his persistence, Powell was never placed on the same level as other black stars of his era, like Denzel Washington, Samuel L. Jackson, or Lawrence Fishburne. Not because he lacked talent, but because Hollywood chose to elevate only certain faces. Powell was seen as the man who never went unemployed, but also the man who never became a star. He once lamented, "I work non-stop, but I've never felt like I was given a real opportunity." Clifton Powell was never the A-list actor making tens of millions per role, but behind those hundreds of performances lies a bitter story, and the price he paid for choosing to stand with his community. Little Black Movie. When Clifton Powell dared to challenge Hollywood. In a recent conversation, Powell shocked many when he openly named the agent who once fired him. Without hesitation, he said it was Jeff Witjas at APA, one of Hollywood's major talent agencies. And why did Jeff Witjas drop him? Because Powell had taken on another film produced by black filmmakers. He recalled the agent's mocking tone. "You're doing another one of those little black movies." Powell didn't flinch. He shot back, "You're damn right. I got a family to feed." Then he hung up, not long after his contract was terminated. It sounds like a movie script, but it was the raw truth of Hollywood, a place where so-called black movies were once dismissed, and where an actor could lose his career simply for choosing to stay close to his own audience. Powell doesn't deny it. In fact, he recounts it with a smile tinged with bitterness, because that choice is what kept him connected to his community. He knew it might cost him some big opportunities, but he never lost his soul as an artist. And when the LA Times asked him about his audience, Powell was clear. "They've kept me alive all these years. Black folks, Latin folks, Asian folks, even young white audiences. I will perform for them." That Little Black Movie story wasn't just about getting fired. It was a declaration. A declaration that in a Hollywood full of injustice, Powell chose the harder road, the road of loyalty to his roots, even if it meant sacrificing career money and the dream of stardom. Powell never told that story to complain or to blame fate. On the contrary, he speaks of it with equal parts sarcasm and pride, as if to prove that no setback could extinguish his fire for the craft. Because despite it all, his career kept moving forward. He reached a milestone few actors can touch: nearly 300 roles on both the big and small screen. He has appeared in critically acclaimed films, shared the spotlight in box office hits, and embraced small but spirited projects. Notably, the director of The Gospel, where Powell once shined, later invited him back for Peacock's crime drama series, Fight Night: The $1 Million Heist. The message was clear: being dropped by an agent did not mean the end of the road. What's interesting is that Powell was never the type to take anything and everything. He had his own boundaries. In interviews, he admitted there were roles he wasn't comfortable taking, like playing a gay character. Not out of prejudice, but because he felt he couldn't embody it fully. couldn't make the audience believe. Ironically, those limits helped shape his path. Powell chose roles that were heavy, layered, sometimes gritty, but never ones that went against the truth of his heart. In Hollywood, where so many actors compromise just to survive, Clifton Powell carved out his legacy by knowing when to say no. And perhaps it's that very selectiveness that has kept him resilient for more than 4 decades through every scandal, every loss, and every storm. For 3 decades, Clifton Powell was a familiar face to audiences. People knew him through laughter, through the menace of his villains, and through the warmth of his roles as fathers and loyal friends. But in 2011, his life suddenly took a turn no one saw coming. The dark secret exposed a stain that could not be erased. In 2011, a woman in Ohio named Keontae Myers filed a lawsuit against Clifton Powell in federal court. In her filing, she accused Powell of harming and assaulting her years earlier. As soon as the news appeared in local papers, Powell's name, long associated with films like Next Friday and Ray, was suddenly dragged into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. From being a familiar supporting actor, he became the focus of a legal scandal. What shocked many was Powell's response. He completely denied the allegations. He declared that what was written in the lawsuit was false and insisted he had never done such a thing. But in the eyes of the public, the word accusation was already heavy enough to destroy a man's reputation. The legal battle drags on. From 2011 to 2019, the lawsuit haunted Powell. Court records show he was often late in filing responses and failed to appear within the required deadlines. These delays became a crucial factor in turning the case against him. In the American legal system, if a defendant does not respond or appear on time, the court can issue a default judgment. And that is exactly what happened to Powell. The decisive ruling, 2019. In July 2019, a court in Ohio ruled Powell civilly liable by default. This meant that because he had not fully responded during the proceedings, the court considered the plaintiff to have won. It is important to emphasize, this was not a criminal conviction. Powell was not arrested, not prosecuted, and did not go to prison. But to the public, that distinction was blurred. Headlines screamed, "Clifton Powell held liable in court," without clarifying that it was civil, not criminal, leading audiences to believe he had been found guilty of a crime. Right after the ruling, the American press pounced. Posters from Ray and Next Friday appeared alongside the headlines about the lawsuit. For the media, it was a hot story. For Powell, it was a fatal blow. A career spanning more than 200 roles was suddenly reduced to a single scandalous headline. The price of silence. After the 2019 ruling, Clifton Powell still tried to keep acting. He appeared in small projects, mostly low-profile TV shows and independent films geared toward black audiences. But mainstream Hollywood shut its doors. Major studios were no longer interested. Directors hesitated at the mention of his name. Any project with Powell attached carried questions: would audiences accept him? Would the press dig up the scandal again? This hesitation pushed him out of the mainstream, the very place where he had once earned memorable supporting roles. Remember, Powell once stood alongside Jamie Foxx in Ray, once made audiences across America laugh out loud in Friday. He had spent a lifetime building his career. Yet one civil lawsuit with no criminal conviction was enough to destroy it all. And here lies the most painful truth. Many white actors in Hollywood have faced scandals, some far worse, yet after a few years they were welcomed back, celebrated, even with glowing stories of their comeback. For Powell, a familiar black actor, a single civil lawsuit with no criminal conviction was enough to end his career. The door of forgiveness wide open for some slammed shut in his face. Powell became living proof of injustice, skin color, determined how Hollywood treated you when the storm came. From a familiar face, he became a name tied to scandal. That was the greatest tragedy. Honor could collapse overnight, no matter how much you had given to the craft. The bitter truth was that Powell chose silence. He held no press conferences, appeared on no talk shows to tell his side, launched no media counterattacks. For years, he only gave a few small interviews, always cautious, saying, "I don't want to talk about it any further." Perhaps he believed silence would make the public forget. But Hollywood never forgets. The less he responded, the more reason the media had to blow things out of proportion. And in that silence, Powell was defined the way the press wanted. After the media storm, Clifton Powell did not disappear completely. Strangely enough, after the scandal, the roles he chose carried the weight of confession. as if he was using the screen to say what he had never said in real life. Roles as confessions. One of Powell's most notable performances was in Woman Thou Art Loosed 2004, and later versions where his role was recalled. The film, based on the novel by Pastor T.D. Jakes, revolved around tragedy, forgiveness, and healing. In the movie, Powell played a man haunted by guilt, tormented by his sins, judged by society. The character was not glamorous, not Hollywood dramatic, but weary, aching, as if confessing to God. For many black viewers, the reaction was striking. That wasn't Clifton Powell acting. That was Clifton Powell telling his own story. In later series, Powell often portrayed strict black fathers, sometimes harsh, but beneath the surface was love for their children. These roles were a far cry from his early career, when he was boxed into criminals and gangsters. Here he became the father who shields his children from mistakes, the experienced man offering guidance to the next generation. One viewer once wrote on a forum, "When I see Powell play a father, I don't see a character. I see him trying to apologize to his own children in real life." That is the power of art. It allows an actor to express what cannot be spoken aloud. In many films aired on BET or produced by independent studios, Powell appeared as pastors, ministers, or men who had fallen and found faith again. Many viewers noticed the chilling coincidence. After being crushed by public judgment, he kept choosing scripts about guilt, judgment, and redemption. Was Powell searching for salvation? Or was it his way of showing the world that no matter how far a man falls, he can still find light again? The irony was that Powell never had a major leading role in his life. He was always the man of every supporting role. But after the scandal, those very supporting roles became his public confessions. The surprising part was that black audiences, the ones who had grown up with Powell in films like Friday and Ray, were the most forgiving. On social media, people wrote, "Even if he's got scandals, I still remember Pinky. I still remember Jeff Brown. When he plays a father, it feels real because he knows our pain." That empathy was not enough to bring Powell back to the top, but it was enough for him to keep living, keep acting, and remain part of his community's cultural memory. On screen, Clifton Powell often played gangsters, hustlers, or sharp-edged villains. But once the cameras stopped rolling, he was a man constantly struggling to hold his family together, swallowing his tears time and again. Wife, children, and private life. The scars in the heart of a dark-skinned man. He married Kimberly Powell and had 2 children, his daughter Maya and his son Clifton Powell Jr. But this marriage was far from peaceful. In a conversation with The Art of Dialogue, he admitted that marrying too early when his career had not yet stabilized was the biggest mistake. He explained that while he was struggling to find a place in Hollywood, he also carried the responsibility of a family. That pressure pushed both his marriage and his career into repeated dead ends. And when things could no longer be saved, Powell paid a heavy price. He lost his love, lost his home, and lost a large portion of his wealth. At one point, Powell himself admitted he had lost over $10 million in a divorce settlement, a number that stunned listeners. But for him, the greater pain was the lost years that could never be reclaimed. Yet in the midst of heartbreak, Powell found his greatest source of comfort: his 2 children, Maya Powell and Clifton Powell Jr. Maya chose to live a quiet life away from the noise of Hollywood, while Jr. pursued a creative path. Clifton Jr. became a young director, writing scripts and creating commercials for major brands. Powell once proudly said that when he watched his son work behind the camera, it felt like watching his younger self, only this time it was a beginning with fewer prejudices and barriers than he had faced. What drew even more attention was when his son Clifton Powell Jr. went public with his relationship with Sasha Obama, the younger daughter of former U.S. President Barack Obama. In the media spotlight, Powell did not shy away. He appeared on the Dear Fathers podcast and gave his son a piece of advice that was both simple and profound: treat Sasha like you would want somebody to treat your daughter. In that moment, Clifton Powell truly showed himself to be a great father. Many still assume that with over 200 roles across film and television, Clifton Powell must be a wealthy millionaire living in a luxurious mansion like Hollywood's A-list stars. But the reality was far colder, far harsher. Wealth. Behind the spotlight lies bitter numbers. According to estimates from Celebrity Net Worth and other entertainment finance outlets, Clifton Powell's net worth is only around $400,000 to $500,000, a shockingly modest figure when compared to his white peers of the same era. Behind that number lies a journey soaked in sweat and tears. Powell once admitted that the greatest shock of his life came from the collapse of his marriage. In one interview, he confessed with pain in his voice, "Marriage was my biggest mistake. I lost $10 million. $10 million, not just money, but decades of artistic labor. The sweat of film sets the roles into which he poured his heart. And with a single divorce, it all slipped away." The troubles did not end there. Powell was also dragged into complicated civil lawsuits. In 2013, a court issued a default judgment against him in the Chianti Myers case, later appealed and stretched out for years. These legal battles drained huge sums in legal fees and settlements while also exhausting his spirit and dragging his name into heavy headlines. At one point, Powell's career seemed to collapse into an abyss. He even admitted he had been homeless with nothing but an old Mazda to his name. He recalled how people laughed, unable to believe that an actor who once shared the screen with Jamie Foxx and Denzel Washington was driving such a modest car. But Powell only smiled. He knew he had hit rock bottom, and the only way left was up. Then one day he appeared in a clip driving a Yukon SUV worth over $100,000, a transformation that shocked many. But Powell did not flaunt it. To him, the car was only a small symbol of having fought his way out of crisis, not proof of wealth. What's more telling is that despite starring in hundreds of films, there is no public record of Powell owning multi-million-dollar mansions in Hollywood Hills or Malibu. No major outlet ever reported him living in extravagant estates. On the contrary, he lived simply, and his actual wealth seemed mostly eroded by broken marriages, lawsuits, and his refusal to chase after glittering illusions. Yet through all these losses, Powell did not fall. He kept working, kept acting, even if it meant playing minor villains with little screen time or comedic roles dismissed by critics. He once said, "As long as I can act, I will never quit." Today, when people look at the number $400,000, they may shake their heads and call it failure. But for Clifton Powell, that number stands as proof of resilience after Hollywood turned its back on him. His true wealth, therefore, does not only lie in the figures in his bank account. It lies in the respect of audiences and the hundreds of roles etched into memory, and in the bitter but powerful lesson that Hollywood may strip him of money, but it can never take the soul of a true artist. Clifton Powell. When the lights go out, his heart still belongs to the community. Audiences know Clifton Powell for his gritty villains characters that were hateful yet unforgettable. But few realize that once he steps off set, he becomes a quiet mentor, pouring his love and time into the younger generation. Powell once traveled to St. Louis to join the On-the-Set Summer Film Camp, a filmmaking program for high school students. He didn't stand there as a distant star. Instead, he blended into the classroom, showing kids how to face the camera, how to live inside a character, and most importantly, how to hold on to faith when Hollywood turns its back. He taught them that a dream in film could start anywhere, even from the most ordinary beginnings. Beyond that, in many conversations, Powell has spoken of wanting to work with organizations like Covenant House, which supports homeless youth. He knows what loss feels like, what it means to be pushed to society's margins, because he himself once fell to rock bottom. And now Powell chooses to turn his own scars into advice, into an outstretched hand for young people in need of hope. Clifton Powell, his life today and latest projects. After decades and more than 200 roles, people assumed Clifton Powell would finally rest in the glow of his career. But no. Nearing 70, he remains relentless, still showing up on screen, still sparking conversations with stories he had never shared before. In 2024, Powell made a surprising return in Peacock's crime series, Fight Night: The $1 Million Heist, which dramatizes one of Atlanta's most shocking robberies. His presence, even in a supporting role, reminded audiences that Powell has never truly disappeared from Hollywood. At the same time, he continued to appear in independent projects like Skeletons in the Closet, Capital Punishment, and Return of the Mac. These roles may not bring great fame, but they portray a Clifton Powell who is resilient, steadfast, and wholly devoted to his craft. In his private life, Powell remains reserved. Yet what stirred the most attention recently was not his acting but his candor. In September 2025, during an interview, he openly named the agent who had once fired him simply because he took part in a Little Black movie. Today, though his wealth is modest, though he owns no multi-million-dollar mansion or flashy supercars, Powell still holds on to what matters most: the respect of his audience. He teaches, he leads workshops for youth, he gives back to the community. He turns the scars of his life into lessons for the next generation. Hollywood may turn its back, but audiences never forget him. And that is Clifton Powell's greatest role of all, the role called resilience. Clifton Powell, influence and legacy. In Hollywood, where the spotlight usually shines only on A-list stars, Clifton Powell chose a different path, quiet, persistent, and unforgettable through supporting roles that may have seemed small, but left a lasting mark. He does not have an Oscar. He does not own a multi-million-dollar mansion in Beverly Hills. But Clifton Powell has something far more enduring than any award: his influence on an entire generation of Black audiences, and on young actors struggling to break through Hollywood's closed gates. When he steps in front of the camera, audiences don't just see a character. They see the shadow of a man who has endured injustice, lost everything, and yet never abandoned the craft. Today, looking back on nearly 300 roles, it's clear Clifton Powell has become part of America's cultural memory. From Pinky's wild grin in Next Friday to the haunting voice of Big Smoke in GTA San Andreas, Powell's legacy lives on in the memories of millions who once laughed, cried, or raged at the characters he brought to life.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.